And just like that, my friend, here we are. We are live. I am Chris. He is Sebastian. And today on the Long Box Punk, we are going to be talking about what he has started with Goats Flying Press. Sebastian, man, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate having you here.
Awesome.
So in case folks don't know, and I know when we were emailing back and forth, we kind of compared our stories and we have a lot of similarities. I think in how we ended up where we are. So I'd love to talk to you about a little bit about your background, how you ended up here starting Goats Flying Press, and kind of like why now. So if you don't mind, just give us a peek into the brain of yours.
Yeah. Well, I've been in comics as an editor and a writer for over 15 years. I started in 2008 as an assistant editor for Marvel. Started my job there. Just my origin story, as I always say, is very boring. I don't have like an exciting falling into comics breaking in story. I applied for a job at Marvel and they needed some assistant editors, and my resume at the time seemed to convince them. I was there for about 4 years, and over the course of editing Marvel comics and also going through I was hired like 3 or 4 weeks before the economy collapsed for the first time since I started working in comics. So it's always been, people always complain like, oh, comics are dying. I was like, I've never worked in a healthy comic book industry, as it were, but here we still are.
Right.
In 2012, I left Marvel. I realized that, I'd love working with comic editors and writers, and having found like it within myself to want to do more of it, but never really. And I was very open about this at the time. In my interview, I was like, I'm not a super Marvel guy. I'm not even a superhero guy, as it were. I was reading a lot of everything else, and I had dabbled with superheroes at the time. And so kind of like knowing that Marvel I could do the work, but to kind of climb the ladder to, senior editorial positions, like you do kind of have to really, really love the characters. I just felt like that was not going to be something that I wanted to do. So I left thinking that was going to kind of be it for me. This was around 2012 when you saw like this big resurgence in creator-owned books being published through Image, and a number of writers and artists that I had worked with at Marvel had a good rapport with. We're now publishing, creator-owned books, primarily Rick Remender, whose editor I became, Jason's Aaron and Latour for Southern Bastards, and then my name started getting passed around because beyond like creative advice and kind of creative guidance that an editor can give, there's also just the production day-to-day of managing a book that a lot of comic book writers and artists just don't want to be solely responsible for when they're on their creator-owned work or juggling a lot of different work, where obviously both Rick and the Jasons were like doing Marvel work and then also doing their creator-owned work. So that's where an editor can help you. Yeah. And then I did that for 6 or 7 years while also starting to write my own books. Shirtless Bear Fighter at the time, started developing that with my good friend and partner Jody LaHoop and Neil Vendrell and my co-creator Galad for Scales and Scoundrels. So I started writing and publishing my own stuff. And then the conversations began would lead to the foundation of TKO Studios, where I was editor-in-chief for 6 years, up until a month or two ago now.
Okay.
And now I'm back on my own, out in the world with Goats Flying Press, which is my very own publisher. Very small, very independent, basically a one-man show. And The Dead and the Damned is our very first book, which is written by myself, art by the incredible Kelly Williams, and lettering and design by my long-term friend and colleague, Jeff Powell. And we are incredibly excited to launch this book out. The official release has been, obviously, it's through Kickstarter, so our backers have had the book for some weeks now.
Yep.
This coming week, we are launching our web store. The book will be available to everyone, and then we will set out from there. Our second campaign is in the works, and we're just going to keep on rolling.
That's great. That's good stuff. You mentioned TKO Studios. How did that come about? Was that just a like networking thing that you ended up as part of that? Because they're also like very young, very creator first publisher. I picked up Sentient by Jeff Lemire Gabe Walta, because those two together both have such a distinct and
Yeah.
unique style that I love. So, and it's in space. And so I like immediately latched onto that. And I just like, the more that I looked into TKO and the more books that I've read from TKO, the more that it's just like they found their voice. And I'm curious, like, were you part of helping establish that identity for TKO? Like, what was your involvement there?
Yes. Short answer is yes. Without self-aggrandizing, if a lot, like I was the editor in chief, I was also the sole editor of all the titles that TKO put out from their launch through now, and I would want to claim a large part of the voice that you spoke of is hopefully due to my creative guidance. That came about, I was reached out to by Z Chun, who's the publisher of TKO.
Okay. Yep.
And he has been a longtime comic book reader and fan since early day, like since he was a kid. Went into indie film, wrote and directed a number of films, worked on shows, was a showrunner for Gotham for a while. And then he and his partner, Salvatore Simeone, they essentially were interested in putting together a new type of comic book publisher, but also like a new type of entertainment studio, what literally called a studio, obviously with sights set on film and television development of their stories. And they were interviewing a number of kind of editors because Z knows about comics and he's a good writer, obviously, as he ended up writing a number of the books as well. But they obviously wanted someone who could help them develop, who had been kind of on the ground floor with writers and artists and knew the landscape. And that's kind of where they were interviewing probably a number of applicants. And because I had been very freshly working, in that kind of image resurgence that I'd mentioned, but also had grounding in, like when you work at Marvel or DC, comparably, like places that have still to this day have like stable of editors and they put out a ton of books, the amount of work you do, just like displacing pages, moving books forward. Like I was editing somewhere between 20 and 25 books at various stages as an assistant editor in my final year at Marvel. Like those are insane amounts. Like that's like 6 or 7 books going to print like every Friday. So just to know what stage everything is at, okay, inks are done, now we can go to lettering, and to do that across 4 or 5 different books, like you just start thinking, it's like when Neo sees the Matrix, like you don't see the actual walls anymore. It's all just numbers. And that's just a muscle memory of being able to run a production that I was also able to bring this beyond the kind of the creator-owned creative guidance, because it's you're having different conversations with someone who's building a world, sci-fi, fantasy, crime, what have you, from scratch, versus working at Marvel or DC, where like your big set pieces are established, have been for decades now. It's Spider-Man, it's Wolverine.
Right.
Your job is to find new takes on these characters. How do we make them relevant again? Is there anyone in the dustbin of the Marvel back catalog that we can, kind of brush off and make interesting again? So these are different skills. So they, made me an offer, and I came on, and they had brought a number of kind of ideas and books to the table, and then I was given the opportunity to, bring in pitches and talk to writers and artists, and we put these books together. But I mean, TKO is I'm very, very proud of all the books we did there. That was an incredible opportunity for me.
Yeah, I as I was prepping for this interview, seeing the work that you had done with TKO, like starting at Marvel, to me just seemed like that seems insane to me, that like you started with one of the big two. And so and in doing some of these interviews, I'm learning that there is no like formula for where people end up. It just kind of is like a combination of luck and timing and skills and being able to sell yourself and all of those things to end up in very different places, which shouldn't be a surprise. And I don't know why, but like every time I talk to anybody, it's very refreshing to me to be like, oh, there's so many different ways that anybody can find their niche. Did you always kind of intend to get into editing, or were you like, this is just a means to an end while I do X to get to where I want to be?
I never thought I would work in comics or in editing. I've been a comic book reader my whole life, and I always loved them. I studied Japanese language, history, and art in university. I was on my way after graduation, got my master's degree. I was going to travel back there and do, part-time jobs, teach English or teach German, and just kind of finish my own language studies there. And I had my sights set on doing some research and maybe going into academia, getting some kind of teaching position. And then I wanted to write basically a doctorate about a certain manga creator from the 60s and 70s, whose book, this was Sanpei Shirato, who wrote and drew a very, very long, impenetrable epic called Kamui, and a spin-off, Kamui Gaiden, which in the 60s and 70s were very heavily read and widely read and influenced the Japanese counterculture movement, especially like in the late 60s and 70s when there were massive student unrest. And so this was an incredibly political comic, but that was also incredibly widely read and very, very popular. And I was just fascinated by that. And he was still alive at the time. He actually just passed away a number of years ago, I think almost 100. So that was kind of like the world I was living in, is to unite my passion for Japanese history and culture and manga, obviously.
Yep.
And that may have, like, that being in my mind may have influenced my, Marvel's desire to hire me at the time, because I brought a different viewpoint, a German-born, American-raised, Japanese infatuated comic book, so the editing, I understood that I really liked it. I liked the collaboration. I enjoyed working on stories, like with you're obviously writing stories and helping writers find their feet and working with artists. So that was a skill I didn't know that I had until I had done it, at Marvel for a number of years. And then again, but I say all the time, like up until 3 or 4 years ago, I thought every year in comics was going to be my last, that I was just going to peter out, or the opportunities wouldn't be there anymore, or I would just find something else, and I just never did. And then when I founded Goats Flying Press last year with the intention of basically just having a publisher to do my own writing, because I've been pitching these books, Dead and the Damned, and a number of others that I'm hoping to bring to the publisher at some point. And I found that, like, publishers are interested, and they, I know how to pitch because I've received a lot of pitches myself, but
right.
The books I want to write and the energy I want to bring, I think, isn't necessarily the kind that publishers right now are going for, considering the landscape and the just trajectory of the industry over the last 10 years. And I found that it would be about as much work to rewrite and reshape these pitches to fit the current existing publisher model as it would be to just do an entire publisher myself.
Yeah.
And because I don't have my sights set on Marvel anymore, of climbing this imaginary hill of import.
Yeah.
Like, my career is literally a Benjamin Button. Like, I started at Marvel, which is still, the Olymp for a lot of people who get into the industry. They want to reach that. They want to be able to get the keys to the Batman car, or the Superman car, or the Spider-Man car, what have you. And I'm about to literally move my one-man publisher into my basement and work from there. And I've never felt better. Like, I've never felt more energized and more creatively satisfied and more hopeful, even for an industry that, again, for as long as I've lived and worked in it, people have been telling me is dead. And I'm like, how dead does it need to be? Like,
right.
It's a fitting book. I mean, it's a very bleak, grim book, The Dead and the Damned, about a world that is, so dead that there's barely anything left worth fighting over. Yet here we are. So I'm bringing a lot of, that's not the only meta commentary in the book, but I don't know. I just realized that, like, I love comics. I don't think I'll ever be able to stop making them in some way, shape, or form. And I may as well go through the trouble of putting a publisher together, so that I'll always have a room for it. But it's obviously not only like a pet project for myself. I want to publish my own writing work here, but I'm working with a number of other creators already. I just really want to pace myself, because there's a lot of overpromising. There's a lot of flash in the pan in the comic book industry right now. It has been for a while. kind of with the twinkle in their eye to Hollywood. And because since last year, since the strike, the writer's strike has been solved, but it's kind of very ice cold over there. I don't think that locomotive is really pulling forward, as the streamers are having their own set of troubles. Like, it's never, I just want to make it just about the comics for the first time in my career, really just focus on that. And however modest, that remains, have hundreds of readers, thousands of readers, even, like, that's plenty for me. I think that there's great value to be had in just focusing on what you want to make, and then zeroing in on it without trusting that the algorithm will, take over at some point. Like, if I have to, I'm physically mailing out every copy myself. So not just the publisher, but also the marketing person and the warehouse person and the writer and and it's good. I think it feels good. So that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I've started backwards, but I'm excited about where it's going, even if I don't know where we go from here.
Right. Right. I love I'm going to throw this up. So goatsflyingpress.com is live. You said the shop is going to be opening later this month?
Yes.
Okay.
Later this week, I hope. I'm like doing the bits and bobs. Like, it's, again, 100% homemade. But it should be up and running this week. If you go to Goats Flying Press now, you can still sign up just with your email. You'll get the first the web store launch. You'll get a little discount. So if you want to kind of have our offerings are simple. It's our first book, and we have some stickers and a pin. But in time, I want to start building this out. And between, obviously, the Kickstarter campaigns, where we'll always be offering kind of like the best deals, because we want to obviously get our pledges in. But then the web store is kind of where any overage or any interesting in between stuff happens. So between the two, I want to be building this the publisher out to incorporate, again, not as many books as people will be used to. We're not going to be in the comic book store every Wednesday, but I think slowing it down, focusing on quality, and also just kind of like the fun and the community aspect of comics is something that we very much want to build out. So we're going to be trying interesting, weird things that are fun and kind of kooky. Again, because we don't have a quarterly report where if we don't meet our numbers, 20% of the staff gets laid off. Like, it's just kind of like a counter. It's almost like an anti-capitalist comic book publisher, where my goal is to have it be self-sustaining. And that's it. And if we grow beyond that, if we take in an excess one year or another, that will just roll into more comics we can make. We can make an offer to a first-time writer or artist, or offer to do a special print run for someone who wants to put out their first work and like debut new works, new creators. Like, it's very, very difficult for young writers and artists to kind of get a foothold into the industry. And I'm not promising anyone a career yet, but I do think that long term, the experiences that I've had both as a writer and an editor over 15 pretty turbulent years in our industry could be like, I just want to offer that up and be considered like a resource for young creators who still want to kind of gain a foothold. Because again, like, comics have been declared dead numerous times during their existence, and we're still here. Like, it's just, we're not going away. So I just want to make sure that there's one more harbor, fans and writers and creators can kind of steer to.
Yeah, I love that. I love the willingness that you're taking to like offer that of, hey, I've got experience, I've been through the trenches, I've done the work, and also that just the attitude of like, I have these stories that I know I want to tell, and no one really wants them because they don't fit their mold or whatever, so I'm just going to do it myself. That is very I talk a lot, I've done radio and stuff, and I've got 15-20 years in broadcasting and all of that. And I've always loved like punk rock music, and not even like, it's not even, the shirt or the band t-shirt or whatever, as I wear both of them. It's, to me, it's more about the attitude of like, if no one else is going to do it, I'm just going to do it myself, and I'm going to figure it out. And like, that to me is the heart of what punk is. And like, always has been, is that DIY attitude. So speaking of punk, little transition into music. I'm curious, like, has music played into or influenced your creative process, or like has it inspired you to like do something specific, or has it played into like your formative years of just creating?
Yeah, I mean, The Dead and the Damned is very like, people are like, this looks like a heavy metal album, and I'm like,
Mhm.
yes, but also, like, I'm a big. It's funny, like for a long time, like my people always look back like with fondness to their high school years and their 20s when they were young and life was exciting, and I'm very much the opposite. I'm like, I had a really hard time in my teens and my 20s. I'm a late bloomer. I didn't start writing, like I didn't start feeling like I wanted to create something until I was 30, 35, almost, like very, very late, when most people who are like, oh, it's too late to start something, you see like you online and people are like, I'm turning 18, my life is over now, where it's like,
Yeah.
simmer down, plenty of time left to do.
Right.
And part of that was because I was always very internalizing things. I mean, introvert and all those kind of, just not very projecting ideas and thoughts and stuff I wanted to do outwards. And a lot of that also had to do with music that I just kind of like, I sunk into myself, and I would read comics and I listened to a lot of heavy metal, but I didn't really have anyone in my periphery to share that with. All of my friends listened to, like more rock and roll and the
Yeah.
Beatles. And I was just like, can I like talk about Dimmu Borgir or like, like this is early aughts, like Valfar and like just like some black metal stuff.
Yeah.
And it was similar with comics, where this was something I was very passionate about, but didn't have that many people to share it with until the moment when I started working in comics.
Sure.
And then I realized that there's a benefit to like listening to kind of extreme metal, is because you don't barely understand half of the words anyone's saying. But I started realizing that there was kind of like, obviously the harmony and the like guttural screeching, like you sometimes pick up words even if they're not the intended words by the
Yeah.
band or artist, and I started piecing them together almost like a random word generator. And I've gotten a number of like, not like plot lines or titles, but like character names, or just like the way your ear will catch on to something where like, did he say that?
Yeah.
What could that mean? And all of a sudden your mind will like cascade and snowball into places. So The Den of the Damned was written almost entirely while listening to a single album by a band called Caledon Brood, which 10, 12 years ago, they're from Utah, I believe. These two music students made a like atmospheric black metal album based on the writings of Steven Eriksson's Malazan Book of the Fallen, which is this
Okay.
long-running, fantasy epic that is
Yeah.
borderline unreadable. And there's just something very swelling and dramatic. And again, like you can listen to it. I can't listen to like spoken word or actual like lyrics when I'm writing.
Yep.
But I can listen to like black metal screeching and death metal and stuff like that. So there is like a background music element to my writing. I just enjoy listening to different kinds of music, but for the most part, I kind of like, I'll find an album that kind of fits the tone of what I'm trying to write, and then just kind of, put it on repeat and just kind of blast through some scripts.
Yep.
That's but, and the way that music can like ignite emotions in you, and serve as, just kind of like fertilizer for your thoughts. And if you're jotting down notes, or you have your notebook and then you're looking at it and you're like, what was I thinking when I wrote this? And then you can like remember that you were listening to certain types of music, and then you put on the music and you look at your notes again, you're like, oh, okay, now I get it. Like now I put it takes you back. It's like something like a smell can transport you in your mind to a certain time in your life. I think a piece of music can transport you to like an emotional moment that you had, that you can then maybe translate into a story, into a character, and move on from there. So I'm a big proponent of using music to kind of put you into different mindsets and emotions to help you move forward.
Yep, that's great. I completely agree, and I feel like you were just pulling words out of my head, because I I do the same thing where like I will hear something in a song and my brain just never stops. And so I will hear something and then like end up on this weird mental spiral of like, well, that could have been, you know, this thing. And like, if I had this phrase, like, what could that become or where did that come from? And then I'm like crafting these ideas and these stories in my brain just from something that I heard, or like it could be, I'm always trying to listen when I'm in public around other people, because you end up hearing snippets of conversations and then like trying to figure out a game that I play when I'm out to dinner with my wife is like just finding a table on the other side of the restaurant or finding a couple on the other side of the concert floor. And then we just go back and forth talking about like, what are they doing right now? Like where, you know, what's their story right now tonight? And then we just kind of narrate over top of them.
Right.
And it's that sort of thing that I find myself doing even with music. I'm the same way. It has to be instrumental. If there's lyrics, I'm gonna write the lyrics instead of writing whatever I'm trying to write from my brain. And so I love the atmospheric thing.
Yeah.
That because I completely agree. And I mean, it's the same with just about everything, right? Like anything that I see, like a t-shirt even that I pull out, I'm like, oh, I remember when I bought this and I was feeling and blah, blah, and like, I want to wear that today because I was confident then. I'm going to wear it today because I'm confident now. And so yeah, I find that that type of inspiration and like the memory linking with stuff very prevalent.
Yeah,
so
because you never know what's gonna, again, like I'm talking about heavy metal, which is, you know, not a music that's lauded by, you know,
it's not
obviously,
typical.
it's people are like, well, I listen to this and that, and then you have that entire like manga, like lo-fi hip hop beats to like that whole entire weird YouTube section of like, these are the kind of music. I'm like, I don't know, I want to be inspired by things that I'm inspired by. I don't want to, again, like your 10s and 20s, like you're discovering the things that speak to you aren't the things that the society or what have you is telling you should be inspired by. Or I'm like, but this just happens to be it. I don't know why I'm pulled this way. I don't know why my receptors are set to those frequencies. And then to kind of get into, you know, again, love my 30s, love my 40s, to just kind of be like, I think I'm finally growing, like aging into my personality, where I'm like, I've never actually cared about any of the, like what people think and all that stuff. But like, of course you still do, like, you're still a human being in the world. You want to be heard. You want to have your thoughts considered by others and have your feelings be not hurt, and to kind of find a place where you're feeling comfortable enough to explore some of the darker parts of your own experience and thoughts that you have, and then share them, you know, with an artist like Kelly, who's, you know, incredible, where I'm like, this is a really dark, depressing book. And he's like, I don't know, there's lots of skeletons in it. I think this is badass, and like absolutely crushes it. It's an interesting way. And I do really feel like every book I've written especially is very unique, because it's written specifically for that artist. I don't have it in me to kind of write something that I could shotgun at 100 different artists. Like I'm sure a number of other artists could have done The Dead and the Damned, but it was very, very specifically written for Kelly, in the same way that Scales and Scoundrels was written and developed also with an artist in mind, you know. So I've never had that kind of, I think that is a particular mark of superhero comics, where both the writer and the artist are basically like coming to a pre-established toy box, and everyone's like rooting around in it, and the artist will be like, I love this character, but I love this costume, and the writer's like, great, I love these two characters because 50 years ago there was a story by this other guy that established this thing. And you're just playing with different pieces and engaging in the creative process differently. And I don't really have that in me. I don't know which IP I would take and absolutely crush. I would much rather always kind of like build something from scratch and like found an entire religion and a fictional world, so that I could bring a character to a certain point in time and try to make that happen. Because it is like, obviously you're creating something, and comics are fun, and you want to sell them, and you want to rise through the ranks, but like it is also just like an incredibly collaborative form of self-expression. You know, I hope to write other things in my life, write a book, write screenplays, what have you. But there's a part of me that's always going to want to write comics. And write comics specifically for an artist that I kind of helped, and they have helped me express things through each other.
Yeah.
I think that there's a very, very human component where, of course, there's elements of, I want to write this story and nobody can touch it. This is 100% me.
Yeah.
But again, I think that that does have to be a novel or a series of poetry, whatever have you. Like, nobody else will look at it until it's done. And with comics, you have that back and forth. Like, I do think self-expression, just like in an echo chamber, is not full. Like, you're not fully expressing yourself until you're expressing yourself to someone, showing what's inside of you and trusting them to see it, good and bad, and to not shy away. And that's why I love comics, is specifically because of the collaboration, not just writing something and then putting it out into the world for people to read, but in the creative process, already bearing your soul to someone and seeing them bear something back to you.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I have found that it is a very personal thing to write a story with characters that have, you've birthed out of your brain, and then showing it to someone else, like, hey, this is my thing. Will you help me make this thing real? And it is like just, ripping open your chest. Like, here is all of this stuff of me. And to have them take it and then really like expand on it and maybe take it to the next level is just, it's top tier. And speaking of top tier, dude, this book, man, this is so much fun. Like,
thank you.
Even from when just like looking at it, like, I love it's a matte cover, which really can't be conveyed through video, but like it's a nice matte cover. It's the square bound, which I'm such a sucker for. It's oversized, which is fun because now I get to put it on my shelf. It's like, it's not going to just fit neatly in a comic box, which I'm totally cool with. Like, I love showing off really cool stuff. But Kelly's artwork in this is just like the muted color palette that he uses, that really just makes all of the blood and the death and the gore just pop even extra. Like, this is so much fun. Had you worked with Kelly before? I know you talked about like writing this specifically for him, so I'm assuming there is a pre-existing relationship there.
Yes.
You were like, I have this idea.
I saw Kelly's work. This was like back when social media still sort of functioned. And he was doing, which he still does, his creator anthology, The Dark, where he writes and draws these horror shorts. And there's something just drawn. I'm a horror buff and a heavy metal guy, and I love monsters and skeletons and all kinds of stuff. And Kelly is just like
all of that.
He's one of the preeminent horror artists. Like, I do, and he's also someone who's been around for, the first time I met him, I was like, he was like, well, I'm older than I look. Like, he was like talking about being in comics for 20 years. And I was like, did you start when you were 10? He's like, no, I'm older than I look. But just such a character. And so, but like, you look at his artwork and like, he draws monsters and he draws horrible violence, but like, he'll nail all the quiet moments. His most recent, The Dark Story, which are free to read on his website, so definitely go see them. Spider has some like bone chilling sequences, and it's the quiet moments. Like, he just nails it. He's such a good cartoonist. And I like say that specifically. I know that term outside of the industry like conjures up images of like Jim Davis and others, but like, a cartoonist is someone who writes and draws a story. And Kelly is an incredible cartoonist, an incredible horror cartoonist, where, again, like, slotted into what's hot right now. Everyone's talking about Junji Ito, and yes, granted that Junji Ito is a modern master, but I would slot Kelly in well aside there, because he just approaches the page with as like a sculptor like approaches a piece of marble and starts chiseling away at it. And it's just incredibly honest and pure. And he had done a short story for TKO when we were doing the shorts, which was excellent. And I really enjoyed working with him. And I purchased the cover piece for that. And it's also because it's all traditional art. He'll do pencils and inks and watercolor, brushwork, paints, like, just absolutely beautiful. And there's something you get, like, when I held the actually can take it off the wall here. I know we're live, but it's this incredibly beautiful piece.
Yeah.
That until you actually hold it in your hands. So I kind of figured I wanted to work with Kelly on something, and I couldn't really tell what. We have a number of kind of projects that I might still want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I was just in a very dark place in my life, maybe. And maybe I was a little tired of, I've been writing Scales and Scoundrels for some time, which is very all ages fantasy friendly. And I love it. And I do, but there's also, there's a second wolf in my chest. And I think I wrote Kelly, like, would you be willing to draw something where like I kind of embrace like every dark thought I've ever had? And he was like, yeah, that sounds cool. Like, hit me up. And I put together a little cheat sheet, and we put together a pitch, and that's like the first 8 pages of the project. And then we pitched that around, and we, got the thing that I talked about where we got some notes back. We're like, this is great. Could you like turn it? Can it go from an 11 like down to an 8? And also like have there be like, can there be characters in it that aren't corpses? And can it not be like an existential slaughterhouse? And I was like, yeah, it could, but then what are we talking about? Like, this is not going to be, it's toyetic. Like, it wasn't toyetic, even though actually it sort of is, because I used to buy skeleton action figures all the time.
Oh yeah.
Skeleton Warriors was, it was a poor man's attempt at a He-Man, but I remember it. So I was just put in a spot where I was, I was like, man, writing it the way I had a couple of publishers express interest in it. Something clicked in me. I was like, I don't know, this doesn't make sense. So I went to Kelly and I was like, if we were to do this, the Kickstarter route, would you be willing? And Kelly was like, I'm willing to do anything. Like, I just don't want to have to do the Kickstarter. And I'm like, great, I'll figure it out. Yeah. And then as I was doing that, I was like, this isn't the only book that is like this. Like, I have a number of projects that I want to write that basically I'm just waiting on having enough money to kind of pay an artist to start working far enough ahead to be able to publish it. It was like, wouldn't it be better to just create an entity, like a publishing entity, as opposed to kickstarting this under my own name? And then it's just another, like, I'm just another guy on Kickstarter. Yeah. Because there are other things I want to do that maybe I don't want to write, like edit or publish. And that's where the idea came, was like, I could just have a little publisher on Kickstarter. It's been done before. It's not like the first time I'm doing it. Like crowd-funded publishers are already a thing and are becoming more and more a thing. The more established publishers and the publishing landscape in general just kind of is being, stripped for spare parts. But again, I don't have to do it better than everyone. I just have to do it my way, and it has to work towards my own goals. And so far, I've only been actively working on it for a little over a year, and we only announced in September, and in October we had our first Kickstarter, and now we're fulfilling our book, and the second Kickstarter is in the pipeline that's going to be coming soon, and a third project is possible this year. It all depends kind of on how fast we can grow. These books are happening regardless. I made the moniker of the publisher against comics against all odds. Yep. Those odds are increasingly did not expect how much work that phrase would be doing at this point, but I'm very happy I chose it. So I don't know. I'm excited that The Dead and the Damned is our first book. I think that sometimes if you think again like a traditional publisher, like, let's launch with our most marketable and our most crowd-pleasing book, and I'm like, how about we launch with a book where 99% of the cast is dead, the other 1% are dying, and it's unreasonably bleak, while also being kind of funny. Where again, like, I genuinely don't know how to pitch this book like the classic X meets Y, and I just don't want to do any of that. It's a very, very stubborn. It's a stubborn book by a stubborn person, founding stubborn publisher. But I think that stubbornness very much speaks to the comic book mindset. Making comics is impossible. It's incredibly difficult, and does not pay off in fame or fortune. And yet, it is one of the most addictive and fulfilling things that I have ever done in my life. So I'm glad that I finally, built a little shed in which to create good work. And I feel, incredibly blessed by the overwhelming kind of, welcome and acceptance, but also I'm very excited to put more work out there.
That's great. So with The Dead and the Damned, I keep seeing on social media people that are getting it and also sharing the excitement of like, this book is just like, it's firing on all cylinders. It's a very fun read, even though it is very dark, very bleak, but it's so fresh because of that. And as like a horror person, it like seeing the cover alone, I was like, this is going to be a banger. Like, there's no doubt that this book is just going to be right in my wheelhouse, and it is. And so seeing that same sentiment come from all sorts of other people on social media is it, like we spoke about it earlier, about just finding the community of like, oh, there are like-minded people that are out there. And that to me is like the sweet spot of like kind of the indie scene. And I know that indie scene gets tossed around a lot, but like that for me is why this scene is so special, because it is finding other people that think the same, like the same, read the same. Like I went through the big superhero thing and ever like as an adult, which is still weird to say, but as an adult, I find myself not reading many superhero books. I'm reading slice of life. I'm reading sci-fi. I'm reading horror. I'm reading like the really like psychological examination books, those sort of things. And so finding that community with people as just readers is incredibly rewarding. That's why I love going to cons and expos.
Yeah.
So as a creator, like I can only imagine that that is exponentially higher to see people resonating with what you're putting out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's, and again, it's kind of the fun. I'm sorry, there's a car alarm here because I think it started hailing. The kind of backwards effect of work, of starting my, like learning how to make comics. And it's not just like, oh, here's how a script is written, here's how art comes in, but also just like the intricacies of the market, the direct market, what are the benefits to, like Kickstarter comics weren't a thing when I started out. That's all a trajectory that, you know, I kind of hopped on relatively late. And now there's also, you know, kind of like a bubble there that's going to pop at some point. You have established publishers with like, you know, VC capital and that are still like have entire Kickstarter departments. And it's always in flux. Like people talk about the comic book industry as if it's, you know, chiseled in stone, you know, held, you know, passed down from on high, but it's constantly in flux. It's one of the most turbulent, weird industries with so many scam artists, poor choice of words. And there's still there's like a molten core at the center of it, which is, I think, like impenetrable. It's immortal. And that's the beating heart of it. And I think that the community around comics, which I always tell young artists, like if you have an artist or if you have a writer you like just reach out to them. Don't be ashamed. Don't feel like, oh, I'm going to be star-struck or something. Like it's just people. And like, especially for artists who are trying to get into it, get some pointers, get some reviews. Like I always try to give everyone the time of day, because it's that community that I've really, I think that kept me in the industry even when I was having trouble kind of finding my creative wheels, or didn't feel like I was like, why am I doing this? Like,
yeah,
you know, successful or not, or like, am I making enough money or not? And now to finally kind of come around to be like, I'm actually doing something that I love, that I can't ever see myself not doing. And it's not just me sitting in a laboratory, like tinkering away, making my genius little comics. Like I'm genuinely excited about people reading them.
Yeah.
And seeing how weird and kind of not traditional they are, and, you know, might be surprised or weirded out like by how the stories go, because it's clearly not, you know, someone wrote in and was like, I love this book. I love all the bad guys. And I was like, there's no bad guys in my book. I was like, oh, all the dead people. Yes, clearly, like from a traditional perspective, all the undead, all the dead are clearly bad, but I don't actually see them that way. So it's fine. It was going to be surprising when the second issue rolls out and it's just dead people having funny, just like remembering being alive.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot to talk about. I really do feel very excited about it being a real thing now. Because again, when you're sitting on something for so long, and also just the, there's a lot of, I talk to a lot of comic book people, obviously, but right now there's a real malaise, I think, going through the industry between just the world in general being bad. I think everyone kind of realizing that the last couple of years were traumatic, and the industry is always going through shifts. The whole AI, LLM thing, even though none of it is really true yet, I think has had a lot of, it's all very depressing, and social media is terrible.
Yeah.
And I used to be very receptive to those currents. I mean, I still am, you catch me on a bad day if I'm on Twitter or Instagram for too long, and it'll really drag me into a hole. And I have to get my way out of it. But I'm actually, oddly enough, now like the most optimistic person in my circle of sometimes peers, and I'll just reach out to people and they're like, man, comics suck. And I don't know, like how much longer can I do this? And to just feel like, I'm not trying to keep anyone in comics, by the way. Like, if you have to leave for a while, get another job, feel better about yourself, take a personal year, come back. Like, we're not going anywhere. And there's really nothing, like, what are you going to be, king of the trash pile? Like, make the books you want, find the people you want to share them with. And that's not, you can't alchemize that in any other way. The fact that comics are now supposed to kind of be the fusion core of $1 billion, film and TV industry, like that's just capitalism. Like it's always going to find something to latch onto and consume. The fact that it happens to be comics all the time is because, and this is like a fact, is like people who can make comics can do things that no one else can. Right. To like think of a story, think of characters and a setting, and create a cohesive narrative, and then put it out. There's people who make 7-figure sums in Hollywood who can't actually do that. They need to have it like spoon-fed to them.
Yep.
And it's incredible to be in a position to do that, but also just do it for the hell of it. Like, also just be like, I don't know, like, go ahead, try to make a movie out of The Dead and the Damned. I will gladly option you the rights, get me paid. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to try and put myself in it, but like, I actually kind of think like stop motion could be pretty cool if they ever wanted to do like a hard R stop motion animated film. But maybe I have to found a movie studio to make that. But who knows? After 15 years of doing this, it's weird to be in a spot where now I'm like, I think I'm just getting started. Like, I think all my best work is still ahead of me. And to be able to say that at a time when, whew, my God, it's bad. It's bad out there. I keep saying like comics, I don't know if I can actually stop making them right now, because I think they legitimately make me a better person and make me a better person to be around for my family and my kid and my friends, and hopefully for the community of other comic book creators, is to just be like, hey, this guy's doing it on his own and seems to be happy and not pulling his hair out. Like, if what little, leading by example I do, inspires anyone else to go out on a limb and try to do something special, like, that's just where the good energy is, and that's where the good work is. And that's where you make the kind of stuff the kind of books I read growing up that really spoke to me, probably weren't the ones that were selling the best at the time. Right. It was just, sometimes you got to have a book at the right time, read it in the right frame of mind, and it can legitimately change your life.
Yep. I completely agree with that. I remember the first time that I went to a comic shop with my dad, and he had been like, oh, well, like this stuff is popular, so maybe try these books. And the first time that I went, and he was like, there's 1,000 books in here, just go pick whatever you want. And I picked you can't see it because of the sun, but it's a Wolverine cover from Larry Hama's run, and it's the cover where he's sitting with his bone claws, and the whole cover just says Wolverine. That was such a striking cover to me that's the book that I picked up. And being able to, like, years later, I just met Larry Hama last year in Cincinnati at the Comic Expo, and I told him that story, like, hey, I want you to sign this book. Not because it's like your first book on the title, not because like it's whatever. It's that personal touch for me that like that's the thing for me. And then like the book that got me back into collecting and reading comics as an adult, I met Matt Kint and had him, and like was able to talk to him about like, dude, the stuff that you were writing, and so I think it's a lot of the personal touch that transcends even like what the comic even is. Like it
Yeah,
could be anything. It could be superhero, it could be sci-fi, it could be whatever. But if people are finding books that they're connecting with, like you're gonna have loyal people forever, right? Like
that's the hope. I mean, that was the idea behind Goats Flying Press. Like, you know, you again coming up through Marvel, where like when I was coming up at Marvel, 20,000 sales, people were like, well, we might start cutting a book at 20K. You know, like you want to launch a book at 100K. And now it's funny to hear that now, because now like 20K will go a long way. And then people are like, oh, comics are dead because they used to sell millions. I'm like, well, not really. They used to ship millions.
Yeah.
And then half of those would be returned.
Yep.
And yes, the other half would be, but like that's how I got, my dad used to, he would work in the city and comics were still sold at the newsstand. And I was reading like the funny papers, you know, like literal Sunday strips, Calvin and Hobbes and all that stuff. But then he would bring like comics by the pound. I think it was like some newsstand would like buy a bunch of comics, and whatever he didn't sell at the end of the week, he would just bundle up with news twine and sell them for $3 or $4 for 3 or 4 pounds of comics. That's and it was a complete mess. It was like a couple of Marvels, a couple of Valiants, and like Pendragoon and these like Chinatown comics that I really loved, because they were clearly like, I call them Chinatown comics, but I didn't read Chinese at the time, but they had like one of the covers was Spawn, but it was like Spawn as a like Romance of the Three Kingdoms era hero. Okay. So it was just kind of like them looking, what's selling in America? I don't know, just knock this off. And I was just reading all of them, assuming that they had some kind of shared story because they were, you know, one big comic. So there's so many ways into the industry. What these stories mean to you before you understand that someone is trying to sell you like a bunch of toys or sell you on like a grand narrative. Like the thing that the Marvel movies ended up doing, and, you know, doing incredibly successfully well, is like, this isn't just a movie, it's part one of an epic saga. Yeah. And then that plays itself out, and now they can't really reignite it. You know, they're going to keep trying, but, you know, sometimes a good story is only a good story once. But it's really cool that was with Larry Hama, because he's such a legend and such a sweetheart. And yeah, I met him at a convention as well, where I'm just kind of awestruck, where I'm like, are you immortal? Like, you can please be around forever. Like, he's so cool. Like, he's such an incredible person, and such a great comic book maker. And again, like the fact that must be in his 70s and still going to cons and just sharing stories. And my, you know, dad, that's an autobiography. Like, that's a biopic I want to see, is that man's trajectory through life. Because what an absolute class act that man is.
Yep. Yeah, I've definitely gotten lucky meeting some of the creators that I could have that interaction with. And I think part of it is, at least in Cincinnati, I've noticed an increasing amount of people that are there are just trying to like get the autos to resell them, because they want the like commercial machine. And I was in line for Jim Lee, because obviously like 90s X-Men, and Omega Red is one of my favorite villains.
I would get in line for Jim Lee. Like, I didn't even read the X-Men. So
yeah, it was just like, that was the X-Men were always my story growing up. And the team that I resonated with, because Professor X told me it was okay to be different. And so like I met Stan Lee and had this whole speech for him, and all I blurted out was, "Thank you for the X-Men." And he like stopped and was like, "Well, I wrote them just for you." And I was like, "You did?" And I'm taking that to the grave with me, because he said it. But waiting in line for Jim Lee, there were all these folks in front of me that had like a huge board with 18 books and a stack of stuff. And I just had my single like X-Men #4 issue. And, I stepped up and the guy was like, just the one. I was like, yeah, just the one. I'm just
the one, just the comic,
just the one. And so I stepped up, and, he had been just cranking through doing the autographs and like not even really interacting with the person at all, because he knew what they were doing. And so they were like, "Hey, this guy's got X-Men 4 for you." And he like stopped and, looked at me, and we had a brief like 3-minute conversation, because he knew that I was there just as a fan of what he's contributed. And so like those experiences are really because of what I'm putting into it, I'm getting out of it. And I feel like that's just the case of like, you know, even with like starting this show, this is a very young show, but because I'm just like, hey, can I just talk to you? Like, I appreciate you taking time with everything that you've done. The more that I read, the more I was like, oh man, like he's done all these things and he's still taking time out of a Sunday afternoon to sit and talk with me
Yeah, but
for a little bit. Like,
this is what it's about, you know. Again, like, I don't know. There's all, I mean, there's all different sorts in the industry, and I don't begrudge someone's desire. Like, if it's your goal to go from the comic you made as a zine, you know, in high school, and to like point, you know, Babe Ruth, like, I'm gonna knock it out of the park by writing this Batman story with this artist, like, that's your passion, that's what's driving you, go for it. Like, the industry was literally actually kind of made for people like that. Especially the superhero comic book industry, like from design, it's superlative. It's about rising strength and hope against all odds, and like there is an energy there that I was just never really able to tap into. I'm not American aid. It's not kind of like there's a cultural component to it.
Yeah.
I was always kind of reading wider and more widespread, and I'm also interested, like, in just purely academically in comics as like a marker of cultural import. Like, again, studying Japanese, and there's a reason manga is so popular, and why shonen manga specifically like translates so well to other cultures. But manga is uniquely Japanese and has, you know, historical roots that go back centuries, both artistically and from a written perspective, and all of that stuff that I could talk about forever. But there's something so universally appealing about comics, because I'm looking at my son now who's 3, and he's writing and drawing, and it comes very naturally to want to make an image and write something next to it. And that's, you know, that's, again, like, that's why it's the medium for me, and the fact that it is something we all want to do, and something we all want to share. And like you, like, I don't really go to the comic book store anymore. I get sent a lot of comics, and I read a lot of first-time comics from a lot of people who are like, hey, is this any good? Or do you have any advice for me? So it immediately becomes a story. It's not like me engaging with, you know, like a product. It is me engaging with a human being, and them trying their best to get the skills that I'm, you know, fortunate enough and have been privileged enough to kind of acquire in a very, very concise professional setting. And now I just want to kind of help peel back the curtain, because the next big comic, or the next kind of thing, like, we just lost Akira Toriyama, who it was really, really strange to me how hard that hit me. Because I wasn't like out here like wearing my Dragon Ball shirt every day, but him passing away made me realize, like, there's never been someone like him, and there never will be again. He created an entire language and and the outpouring, like, it actually fixed Twitter. It was so powerful that it fixed Twitter for a day or two, where people were just like pouring out from all across the world in languages I'd never even considered that he was translated into.
Yeah.
And I was like, that dude just drew weird little dudes fighting each other and fantasy, and he drew the meanest machines and the coolest motorcycles and great fashion. Like, he was just the full package. And there's nothing quite like that. Like, you'll have rock stars, and you'll have, I don't know, famous writers or famous painters, but there's something about a famous comic book artist that I think is cooler than anything. Like, Toriyama for me is, man, what a loss, but what a life, you know, and what a legacy. And that, I'm not saying that I can reach that anymore, but those are the people that kind of I aspire to, you know, that kind of energy, that undefinable, just purity of creation and sharing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I look at my desk, and like, I have little figures all over my desk, and I've got all the pops like in hidden in here that you can't see, and statues and the whole nine. And it was just like, it hit me, because for 25 years of my life, his voice was talking to me. His characters were talking to me, his action, like reading the books, reading the manga. Like, that was the first manga I ever bought, was Dragon Ball Z because the show was so good. The book has to be good too. And so like that was the first manga that I got into. And then from there, it just kind of was like, well, what else is manga? Like I see a lot of romance stuff. And then it was like, oh, Shogun manga is like its own thing. And then like, so because of his work, it kind of introduced me to the realm of what manga is. And like Akira was the first anime I ever watched, like ever. And I remember distinctly, like my best friend and I were sitting there and we were watching it at his house because he had a VHS tape taken from his older brother.
Manga video, yeah, the good times.
Yeah. And I remember watching it just being like, this is what this can be like. Movies can be like this, and it just like that. I attribute a lot of like who I am to that moment because it opened my eyes to there is so much out there for so many different people, and you don't have to be limited to like. I was, I think, in 7th grade at the time. So all of my friends were like, everything was football, everything was baseball, everything was basketball. And I just never really cared about any of that. I was into pro wrestling and I was reading comics. Like that's how I grew up.
Perfect.
And stealing my sister's CDs of like Alice in Chains and Metallica and Bush and early, like No Doubt. And so like, that's how I grew up. And so then like finding my 2 or 3 really close friends that also watched pro wrestling and Dragon Ball Z. And we used to try and redraw the characters and do all that stuff. So yeah, like all of those things came flooding back when he passed. Cause it was just like his impact on my life is way more than I would have thought it was because all of those like touch points. I used to call my buddies every day. We would watch Toonami, we would watch the episodes, and then we'd call each other and talk for 25 minutes about what just happened in the episode. And it was just like those friendships. I still talk to that guy that I watched Akira with that and I don't think it's accidental. And I think a lot of that was bonding over that shared experience. And that's the magic of creating because he created single-handedly like all of these things and this world like fully formed. There were the major corporations with Capsule Corp. There was the beliefs, the afterlife, the current life, like the God system, the deity, all the things fully formed. And it was just like, I don't even understand how one person can do that. So it just,
probably his editor was a lot, I mean, for me, it's funny because I know in America, Dragon Ball Z was kind of like the big launcher because that's when, for me, coming again in Germany and the manga wave kind of swept through France, which obviously has a much larger, more established comic market. But for me, it was always Dragon Ball, the original run, where it's not that much fighting yet. It's actually kind of like a sci-fi fantasy, and it's based on Journey to the West, which is one of the 5 great Chinese classics. So he's kind of, it's like if you did a Donald Duck version of like the Arthurian legend, which I would actually imagine Karl Barks has done.
Yeah.
But it's very playful. And it's at the end of that, it was like almost a relaunch, Dragon Ball Z was like, oh, Goku's older now. And it's like it's a more adult in the sense that like, it was a lot more about fighting.
Yep.
But he managed to just do that consistently. And for me, what always strikes is just how pure and honest it is. Like you do actually see when he starts losing interest in it, about 3/4 of the way through, I think that it was selling so much. His editors were like, "We're gonna like nail you, graft you to your torso to a wooden block. Just keep drawing." And he was just like, "I just want to go." And then when he started something like Sandland, I think was the next thing he did after Dragon Ball, like immediately you could tell he was like, "Oh, he's back into it. Like this is clearly his interest." So there's a component of the manga industry that I find incredibly predatory and quite dangerous because. Look, he was 68. That's old, but that's not old enough to die of full body hemorrhage or whatever he had. Like those are severely overworked, overburdened, stressed out people. Kentaro Miura, like rest in peace, Berserk.
Yeah.
I would sacrifice George R. R. Martin 15,000 times on the altar of some dark god if we got even one more chapter from Miura. Again, 58, not an age that you want to be, have your body quit on you like that. So there's a dark side to all of it as there is, and the kind of content mill hunger a bit, but just for a moment, looking at those drawings and just seeing the outswell of, like you said, like at some point in your life, you picked up one issue or two of Dragon Ball, and it just kind of, the purity of his lines transcends. It's really, it's as close to, like, I don't want to oversell it, but it's as close to like a religious experience where something you see penetrates through to some kind of like subconscious level where you're just like, oh my God, is this fun? I love reading this. And there's so much of it. And you just, it turns you into a child. It turns you into a child that just sees adventure and joy in the world. And I don't know if any other medium has done that for me as consistently as comics has.
Yep. I agree with you 100%. That's why, like, when the radio thing that I'm doing, I knew had to change because whatever, it doesn't matter. I knew, like, this is the time that I just need to pull the trigger on this comic thing. Like, I am living it. I feel like I have talked to and developed enough relationships with people that are in the industry that I am no longer just like a consumer. And I want to do something that I can try and maybe give back just a little bit to a community and to a medium that has given me so much. And if you're not in the comics industry or you're not into comics, I feel like it is a unique experience that others just might not get. Because what you said nailed it. Like, it was a otherworldly experience when you find a book or you find characters, or you find, a story or whatever it is that you just can't put down. And like, every page is something new and something exciting. And when you find that, like, that little spark of magic, man, that's what gets you. And like, that's why I love comics, because there are so many books right now and so many creators that are doing their own thing and putting out their own books that, like, I just think this is the best time to be a comic fan, honestly, because
the best time. Like, it is right now. I mean, there's more good work being done and more good work being shared. There's also more, I think, dark clouds on the horizon, whether imaginary or warranted, than ever. But I actually kind of, I always find that to be like the clarion call. Like, you don't sound the rallying trumpet, if everything's fine. It's when the forces of darkness, like, and I mean, it's always the same. We're all fighting every industry, every creative industry is fighting the same monster right now. It's just like got a million different faces. And I'm always excited to see comic book people like right there on the front lines, like unabashedly, just like, it's not even about whatever. This is a whole different conversation about how silly and how trite the argumentation is, but it's something that brings pure joy and is a means of communicating and genuinely penetrating like a person's, maybe how they were brought up, or like it cuts right to your core. Like you said, like reading X-Men, I know X-Men and Marvel comics in general, like feeling like you don't belong, growing up different, whatever situation you are, and these characters mean so much to so many people that you don't get anywhere else. And I think that that's an incredible skill that comics have, that just, I think you can actually change a person if you give them the right comic to read. And you can't change people with anything, not with facts, not with friggin' can't bribe them. Like, you have to kind of, it's like a diamond drill that has to like hit you in your heart and your mind at the same time. And comics are somehow able to do that. And we have to protect them at all costs, and we have to keep making them. And the people who, I don't know, I think there's a comic out there for everyone. That's why I want to keep making them, ideally, so that I can make one for everyone, or, just chip in. Everyone start making them, and we'll read them, and we'll give each other confidence and support. And I think any time you spend making a comic is time is well spent. It's a life well wasted if you spend it making comics.
Yep, I agree. We've been going for over an hour, which again, cool. I appreciate your time. I don't have any time limits. But any last words, closing thoughts? I feel like that was very succinct. But anything else like you want people to know about Ghost Flying Press, or about the books that you're creating or have on the horizon? Any last parting words of wisdom for us?
Well, I mean, just a little sales blurb. If anything we've been talking about here strikes you as something you want to be a part of, Goats Flying Press buy-in. Very simple. Go to our website, goatsflyingpress.com. The web store will be launching this week. So you can pick up our first book, maybe some small merch. We got some pins and some stickers. We'll be having more stuff. Sign up to our newsletter if you're able to. Obviously, we have social media. You can follow us, and please do. But with the inherent breakdown of social media in general, we write once a month. We write a newsletter. You will get it into your inbox. We write a little bit about what we're doing. Up and coming stuff. Obviously, always be the first to know about any new projects or any Kickstarter links. We are going to be crowdfunding Goats Flying Press through Kickstarter for at least the first number of years. It's just kind of where a lot of independent publishing is going, and it's a very, very beneficial system to us. So just that one little sign up to our newsletter, even if you don't like them, it is purely just the best way for us to stay in touch with you until I can physically mail out individual postcards with news on them, which I might very much do, because I actually think reaching out and creating a little experience in someone's life is a good way for them to pay attention. But
Yep.
yeah, back us on Kickstarter, follow us on social media, and we're excited to get comics into your hands and get you the best of what we can offer and keep making comics against all odds.
I love it. I love also, if you're on the edge about newsletters, it's the best direct line to the creators and the publishers that you like. I find more and more that I'm moving away from trying to like go to social media to find stuff about creators, and I'm just subbing to their Substack or Patreon or like email newsletters, and then I dedicate time every week to read whatever has come to me. And I just love that experience because it feels more personal. And as the world continues to feel bigger and bigger, finding ways to make it feel smaller and more personal, like the postcard, I think that's a great idea. If you do that, send me one. I would love to get a postcard.
Yeah. I've got a lot of silly ideas for Goats Flying Press. I want to try everything that I would like. Sometimes I just like, my mom still writes me postcards. It's just like, just thinking about you. Here's a little postcard. And I'm like, this is so sweet. Like, what a nice, I had the other day, this is like the last thing I'll say. A friend of mine was like, I saw a goat today and I had to think about you. And I was like, that's exactly what I want. That is my marketing. I want one of the most populous creatures on planet Earth to be succinctly connected with me and my comic book publisher. So I'm gonna keep working on that.
Perfect.
But yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Man, I appreciate everything that you've shared, spending a little over an hour with me here. Go to goatsflyingpress.com, find all the information. And as far as this video, that's it. He has been Sebastian. I have been Chris. This has been the Longbox Punk. Come back for reviews, for more interviews, for all sorts of things. You can find me all over social media at Longbox Punk. And so until the next time that we have a video or anything, that's going to do it for this video, punks. So go read some comics, and we are going to end the stream right now.